In Objective 3, we'll look at how to successfully deliver your project. Topics include NEPA, design, right-of-way, and bidding.
Obtaining environmental clearance is sometimes the most feared step in the project delivery process. The National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, was enacted in 1969. There are three main purposes of NEPA: to prevent or eliminate damage to the environment, stimulate the health and welfare of people, and to enrich the understanding of ecological systems and the natural resources important to our nation. In this section, we'll walk you through the necessary steps to get your project to environmental clearance, which is needed before construction can begin. One important point to always remember is that MoDOT has a team of environmental specialists that are always ready and willing to assist you in any way possible. Just contact the MoDOT district where your project is located, and they can get you in contact with one of our environmental specialists. NEPA covers almost anything you can think of that relates to a project. A few examples are clean air, highway noise, solid waste, and drinking water. NEPA even covers projects where you are not building anything. These projects are referred to as non-infrastructure projects. Because these projects often involve some element of human interaction, such as safety education training or rideshare marketing, we must take a look at the population of the target audience for these programs to see if we need to provide training materials or marketing materials in more languages than just English. These are just a few examples of the types of reviews that we do during the NEPA review process. Remember, every project will be reviewed and given a NEPA classification. There are 3 NEPA classifications. As you can see from the pie chart, the majority of projects fall into the categorical exclusion, or CE category, with the remaining projects falling into either the EA or EIS categories. A categorical exclusion means the project will have minimal environmental impacts. Most of the time, a CE will be an undocumented CE, which would only require completing about 5 to 7 pages of information about the project and a location map. These types of clearances usually take 60 to 90 days to complete. The environmental assessment, or EA, indicates the project may have some environmental impacts that need to be addressed. These types of clearances generally require 50 to 100 pages of documentation and will likely take months to review and assess. An environmental impact statement, or EIS, indicates there are significant environmental impacts caused by the project. An EIS will likely take years to complete. The documentation can be thousands of pages in length, and usually several different design alternatives will be analyzed to find the preferred alternative with the fewest environmental impacts. An example of a project that would require this level of analysis would be a new major river crossing in an urban downtown area, much like the ones completed in St. Louis and the Kansas City areas. Please remember, 92 to 98% of all projects, including MoDOT projects, are classified as a CE, requiring minimal documentation and can be completed within 90 days. Now let's talk about the steps you will take to receive an environmental clearance for your project. Step 1. You or your consultant will fill out what's called a Request for Environmental Review, or RER form. This form contains basic project information and a project map. It's usually completed about 60 days into design, or approximately 35% planned completion. It's necessary to have a fairly good start on your project design when filling out this form so you can identify the impacts the project will have on your surrounding area. It's then submitted to MoDOT for review. Step 2. MoDOT will review the RER form and establish the NEPA classification for the project. As we mentioned earlier, most projects fall into the CE category. MoDOT will send the local agency a letter indicating the NEPA class and the necessary permits and clearances you or your consultant will need to obtain. Keep in mind, MoDOT does not get these permits or clearances for you. Step 3. Once all permits and clearances are obtained, all the documents are sent to MoDOT for review. Step 4. MoDOT will review all the permits and issue the project and environmental clearance. It's extremely important to note that even if your project has received an environmental clearance, If something changes in the design of that project, resulting in a change in the project limits previously reviewed, you must resubmit the project for another environmental review and clearly identify these project limit changes so MoDOT can reevaluate the environmental impacts to any newly affected areas. During construction, any borrow material from a site not included in the project limits must also be reviewed for an environmental clearance. This is usually the contractor's responsibility, and the most common environmental clearance needed for borrow sites is a Section 106 clearance. So what are the most common permits and clearances that MoDOT may indicate are necessary for your project? The first and most common is the Section 106 clearance from the State Historic Preservation Office. This clearance identifies cultural and historical impacts to properties. Every job that involves moving even 1 teaspoon of dirt needs this clearance. Some examples you may run across involve Indian burial grounds or other historical artifacts. Common permits you may need are the Section 404 and 401 permits obtained from the Corps of Engineers and Missouri DNR. These permits are needed anytime you're working in or near a body of water, most commonly during a bridge replacement project. It usually takes less than 2 months to obtain these permits. If your project involves disturbing more than 1 acre of ground, you'll need to have 3 things in place. Number 1, the land disturbance permit. Number 2, a stormwater preservation prevention plan, or SWIP. I like to think of a SWIP as all the tools in your local agency's toolbox you can utilize to contain stormwater runoff and soil erosion on your project. Some of these tools include rock ditch checks, straw bales, and silt fence. If your entity does not have a SWIP, you can go to the LPA manual in Chapter 6. There is a link to EPA's website where you can adopt a SWIP for your local agency. Number 3, a site-specific erosion control plan. A site-specific erosion control plan is a specific sheet in your project plans that detail which of the tools in your toolbox you will use for this particular project and where those erosion control measures are to be placed in the field. If your project disturbs less than 1 acre of land, you will only need one thing in place, and that's your site-specific erosion control plan. Any project with the potential of having asbestos or lead paint must be inspected prior to demolition by a certified inspector. A list of certified inspectors is found in the LPA manual. It's a best practice to include this task in your consultant contract. However, you can hire the inspector directly if you wish to do so. The inspection reports must be in the bid book so the contractor knows the risk of hazardous materials and what to do if they should encounter any. It's very important that the contractor is informed of the risk up front, because it could result in higher bids the local agency receives if the risk is put on the contractor. If lead paint or asbestos is encountered, the contractor will be required to submit a 10-day notification prior to demolition. With threatened and endangered species, there are 2 common issues you may encounter. There could possibly be restrictions on when you can clear trees to protect the Indiana bat, and you may be required to complete a bat habitat survey if there are known records of the Indiana bat close to your project area. Wait to get advice from the MoDOT Environmental Office before contacting the regulatory agencies, U.S. Fish and Wildlife and the Missouri Department of Conservation. The other issue is protection of birds regulated by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. If certain bird nests occur underneath bridges, there could be seasonal work restrictions for bridge projects. Again, the Environmental Office will let you know of any restrictions required by law.